marijuana around the country. And the alleged, easing off of policing and decriminalization and incarceration. And people seem to understand it when you look at it from that standpoint, right? But what do we do about heroin and pills and coke and the harder drugs? How do we decriminalize that? I'm with Smoke. I go back to the original. I think if we're going to truly address it from a public health standpoint, we need to make it available in a standardized, measured, controlled way, because otherwise, people are going to, if you don't take the profit motive out of it and replace it with something else, adults are going to do what adults are going to do. Right. And if you look at other countries, you can't educate people not to do it. That's not working. Right. So, and for me, it's especially challenging, coming out of the recovery movement, that abstinence, the abstinence model. So people say, we were up at Harvard with, cast and crew from The Wire, talking with I'm blanking on his name. It's Obama's mentor. Charles Ogletree, Professor Ogletree. He does a class at Harvard Law School on The Wire, where graduate law students watch episodes of The Wire, break them down, and look at it from a systemic standpoint, because these are going to be the future DAs and prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges. And so we were up there doing a panel for that, and you can just see the minute you start talking about ending the war on drugs, the question always becomes, well, then what's the alternative? Obviously treatment, but what do we do as far as getting them off the street and making people safe? Needle exchange programs, things like that. Safe place. Other countries. Some other countries are actually using marijuana to treat opiate addiction. Or replacing pain medications with marijuana. You get into a real tricky kind of space when you start talking about it from that standpoint. But to me, those are the kinds of places where the rubber really, hits the road. I would support full legalization, not legalization like you can just walk up to walk up to a corner store like a liquor store and buy heroin. No, but I think if we look at it from a public health standpoint, and we following the lead of, and I think Baltimore's starting to move towards it, like what they've done in, I think some places in Massachusetts and Seattle, we're actually giving the police department the authority to take people off the street and bring them right into treatment programs rather than putting them into the system. Right. Rather than even putting them into drug treatment court or anything like that, taking them directly into treatment. I think that's a start. But then you can manage, you gotta have some way to manage it. You end up with Amsterdam. Everybody that's crazy. It's basically what we have, in pockets of the city right now anyway. Well, as long as it's not downtown, push it up here. How long can you have an open air drug market, going on with no arrests and no, like they don't know what's going on? We on? We doing this? we just talking? Right. It's gotten so out of hand, and I think now that it's touched suburban and rural areas with the prescription pill epidemic, prescription opioid epidemic, I think there's the political understanding and the political will now that it's affected white people. Let's be honest about it. Now that it's affected them, I think there's enough eyes on it to have a serious conversation about the alternatives. But I it's hard to say how do they stop arresting their way out of it? Like what do we do? What's the alternative to that? In the eyes of the system, It's like when I walk by the corner here and I bring the guys together and I say, look, we've got a treatment program here, housing, we've got a kid safe zone here. We're doing prevention, we're doing, for the youth, we're doing treatment for the adults, recovery services, workforce development, supportive housing, peer support, getting people back on the right path. These little kids have dreams, right? And these adults have dreams, or they had dreams. And so we're reminding them that it's never too late to follow your dream. And our treatment program is a block away. This happens to be one of the hottest blocks in the city, so our clients have to run the gauntlet almost, getting from housing to treatment every day. And everybody said, you're crazy. Why would you have a treatment program here right in the middle of it? I said, well, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with you? We're going to ship you off to Florida or some sunny treatment place like the celebrities go to, and then bring you back here and figure out how you're going to live here? Unless we can figure out a place to get rid of all the drugs off the street, figure out a way to deal with that aspect of it, you got to live here. This is where you grew up. This is where your family is. So we bring the guys on the corner together. We say, look, I can't tell y'all to stop doing what you're doing because I don't have a solution. They say, well, we want to work. We don't want to keep doing this. To a man, every one of the corner boys that I've talked to in this neighborhood, every one of the affiliated, young men that I've talked to, we don't want the neighborhood to look like this, but we don't have any other alternatives. Coming back to where we started, right? My father did this, my mother did that. I got arrested when I was 13, started getting locked up when I was 13 or 15 or whatever it is. This is the only option that they have, the only option that they know, most of them. And they go to apply for jobs. The city says, well, we got a workforce development program, or we got this service, or we got that service. And they go through the training program, expecting to change their lives and come out on the other side with some certification, whether it's HVAC or whatever it might be, but there's no job. Or the employer says, oh, I'm sorry, you have a drug conviction. Oh, I'm sorry, there's no job now. That's Sandtown. If everybody knows what's going on and we know what the solutions are, how come the people with the resources or the political power or don't want to change things, don't change things, or make small incremental changes? Like that's a worthy piece of legislation. At the end of the day, if I got to eat, and this is the only option that I have, is that going to stop me from doing what I'm doing? Is that going to stop somebody from selling those drugs? Is that legislation enough? No. What are you going to replace it with? So, one of my mentors, a man named Al-Daha, the grandfather of the recovery movement in Baltimore City, some might say, may he rest in peace. It's a 25-year practicing addict, self-professed stick-up kid, grew up in Sandtown, spent his life in and out of prisons, got himself clean, and became the program director here at Penn North Recovery, and was the founder of the Threshold to Recovery Project back in 2005. And Penn North Recovery Center, through the Threshold to Recovery Project, became the first 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year program where people could get clean, right? So if you can go out on the street and you can cop at 2 o'clock in the morning, you should be able to surrender at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so that was kind of his brainchild, was to say, we need a place where people can show up any time of day, be greeted by a friend, a peer, someone who's going through the same struggle. And that's kind of how we started. But he used to say to me, heroin is a very faithful friend. If you want me to stop, you got to replace it with a friend that's just going to be just as faithful. And that's kind of the same motto for everything that we're talking about here, is if I'm doing something and you want me to stop doing it, what are you going to replace it with? We have to fill that hole with something else. So if I'm selling drugs to make money, are you going to help me to figure out a new way to make money, to feed my kids, to feed my family, to pay the rent, to do the things I need to do? You want me to stop self-medicating using heroin or whatever drugs it may be? What are you going to do to replace that? Sometimes it's you know, a mental health issue that requires, you know, mental health medications or things like that, or counseling. But more often than not, in this community, it's love. It's replacing it with friendship and a community of support and love. So, you know, coming back to, you know, the Corner Boys, everybody's pointing fingers and saying, well, you can't do this because of, like, you can't have a treatment program because, you know, they're selling drugs right here on the corner. Or they need to stop doing this. Or community residents say, y'all need to come and lock them up. I said, well, has anybody actually talked to them? So I went and brought them all together and talked to them and said, hey, this is what we're trying to do in this community. What are y'all trying to do? I said, we're trying to eat. We're trying to survive. We would love to see a computer program. We'd love to see some jobs. We'd love to see these vacant houses fixed up. We'd love to own our own houses. We'd love to have a real estate company. We'd love to, we don't want the community to look like this. To a person, that's what every one of them has told me. And I said, so what do we do? How do we bring investment? You know, so Hogan, you know, announces $700 million to eradicate urban decay and urban blight. On the one hand, it's commendable. That's a huge step in the right direction in my mind. The question is, who's that money going to go to, and what's the ultimate goal? Is it to gentrify Sandtown and parts of Baltimore City? Can we do redevelopment without displacement? Is that money going to go to the community and the entrepreneurs in the community to fix up the houses, to the homeowners in the neighborhood to fix up the houses, to do the work? Or is it going to go to some outside entity who's going to come in and build a big, nice building that nobody in the neighborhood can afford and move people out of their houses and not hire people from the neighborhood? Therefore, it just pushes the problem somewhere else, makes it even worse. How you doing? Yeah? How you feeling?
Wonderful.
Yeah? Good to see you walking around.
Yeah.
What's up, Chang? How you feeling, baby?
I'm wonderful.
Oh, wow, it's good to see you walking around.
That's it.
It's huge. It's huge. I don't know, what is it, 99.9% African-American community? I'll probably be the only white person anybody sees in weeks. The only white person ever standing in this playground, except with the exception of maybe the handful of acupuncturists and counselors or volunteers that come through here to drop off donations to the Kids Safe Zone or to come in and work with some of our clients. But if we weren't here, you'd never see any white people other than cops. And the white cops don't live here. The black cops don't live here. So, you know, when you look at you know, our policing policies, you know, you start to make up your mind about, well, if they let their neighborhood look like that, or they, you know, whatever, the us versus them mentality that segregation, that creates segregation, or that reemphasizes that. Um, I'm a Rouse baby. So Jim Rouse, who came to Sandtown back in the early 90s, who founded Columbia, first planned community in the United States, where you had Section 8 folks living next to wealthy folks, all the kids going to the same schools. You had blacks, whites, Asians, Hispanics. You had rich, poor, all growing up together by design, because he knew that was a problem in urban America. So I grew up in this amazingly diverse place. And it's interesting that my parents came here and started the Penn North Recovery Center at the same time that Jim Rouse came and began investing in Sandtown through the Enterprise Foundation and redeveloping those homes. People talked about, and his vision, I think, was that we should all have, that if urban America is going to survive, if inner cities are going to thrive, they have to be integrated. You have to have mixed use developments. You have to have workforce housing with entrepreneurs and businesses, and everything that a community needs to thrive needs to be there within walking distance. People need to be able to pass each other on a day-to-day basis to understand that we're all human, that we're all one. If you don't interact with somebody that looks different, sounds different, has different traditions, different culture, then you make up stories and you believe what you see in the media, what you see on TV, or what you're told by people who don't know any better. They say that that a lot came out even before the uprising here in Baltimore back in April and May. Article came out, or the report came out from the Justice Policy Institute about Sandtown having the highest incarceration rate in the state of Maryland. And on the heels of that, then a lot of people pointing fingers at Enterprise Foundation and Jim Rouse and saying that it was a failed experiment, or how did they put several $100 millions into Sandtown? And they did. So I want to say between Enterprise and Habitat, they did something they rebuilt somewhere near 1,000 homes. Nice homes, beautiful homes that just a few blocks from here. The challenge was Jim Rouse was a visionary. And I think he was maybe 86 years old when he started that investment. His vision was to redo the entire system, the educational system, job training programs, business incentives, healthcare system. All they got to complete before he passed away was the housing component. So, and nobody stepped in to fill that gap. We talked about before, if you're going to take something away, what are you going to replace it with? No one stepped in to fill that gap. From an institutional money standpoint, to continue that investment, to continue the movement, the progress that was being made. But you have to look at it on all those levels. You need to have an educational system. You need to have an education system that works. You need to have policing policies that work. You need to have a healthcare system that works. You need to have housing that works. And you need to have businesses that, there's a lot of people spending a lot of money that live in Sandtown, that live on the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor, but we don't have any real businesses. We got corner stores selling fried food and liquor, but we don't have a grocery store. Why does that institutional money not come into this community? I know I was talking with Rouse was behind the development of Mondawmin, and talking to the executives who actually, one of the executives behind, who worked for the Rouse Company for a long time, was responsible for Harbor Place and Mondawmin. He told me it took him years to convince the investors, the powers that be, the decision makers, that Mondawmin was a worthy project, that there was money to be spent to attract national chains, national companies, and it's one of their most profitable centers, I believe, now. We begin to attract entrepreneurs from the city to open up businesses. Hello? To attract businesses here in the community, hire residents here in the community. Businesses that not just that we need, but you've got MICA students not far from here. You've got an incredible amount of traffic that goes right up this main artery, all the way from Owings Mills, Pikesville, downtown on a daily basis. You know, if we had a Starbucks or, you know, whatever kind of amenities and services and retail things that people could stop at, they start to feel safe coming into the neighborhood. You start to break down those barriers and start to see people as human beings. That then attracts more investment. Question is, who does that money go to? Does it go to people who have the best intentions for the community, or people who have the best intentions just for making money? Hopefully, you know, ideally those two things go hand in hand. My fear right now is that, you know, this announcement of $700 million being invested in the city to fight the urban decay and the blight goes to the same old people who have been making the same old decisions, who have kept it the way it is, rather than putting it in the hands of some innovative entrepreneurs who live here in the neighborhood. Putting it in the hands of people who are going to fix up the homes and provide affordable housing opportunities, and nice affordable housing opportunities, not just slumlords, not just people trying to make a dollar and then move out of the city. But that it goes to people who want to open businesses here, who want to hire the guys in the neighborhood, who want to hire the women in the neighborhood. The weeks leading up to the uprising, after Freddie Gray's arrest, and the video footage of that, and leading up to the charging of the officers, and the peaceful protests of the community coming together in those weeks before the uprising began, or before the fires and looting and those things started. I saw a community coming together saying, we're not going to take it anymore, peacefully, marching together. Black people, white people, Baltimore City residents saying, enough is enough. And it came to a head. The passion, the anger, hundreds of years of neglect, disenfranchisement, oppression, police brutality, disinvestment in the community, it all came to a head. And the beauty of it was that you could see people coming together peacefully. Brothers who might have been shooting each other during those same times were coming together and marching for a cause greater than themselves. So what I initially saw was a deep sense of optimism and hope and beauty, that people can come together and that we can actually affect change. Unfortunately, you know, we were actually here at Penn North Recovery Center hosting the repast for Freddie Gray's family right after the funeral. And, you know, all day long we were getting word that the police were at Mondawmin and gangs were coming together. Meanwhile, I'm seeing Bloods and Crips together, you know, in the neighborhood talking about peace. I'm seeing Bloods and Crips together in those protests marching together peacefully next to each other. So, you know, we start hearing these reports, and someone walks into the community center where we've got 200 people there that we're feeding, celebrating Freddie Gray's life with his family and friends. And someone comes in and says, they just blew up a police car in front of the building. They just set the CVS on fire. And just 1 block from here. You know, Freddie Gray lived 2 blocks from here, was arrested, you know, just around the corner. The CVS is 1 block in the other direction. And what I saw was that same hope and optimism, that same passion that was, for the weeks prior, had been channeled in a positive direction, but wasn't getting the attention or the outcomes that just wasn't getting the attention of the leadership, the political leadership that it should have been. The voices weren't being heard. It spilled over, but it was that same type of energy, because not 24 hours after the world saw Baltimore burning, it was like a street festival out here. That passion it was like the boil had been lanced, at least for a moment, and the next day, people are out here in the streets celebrating and cleaning up. And what I actually saw in the week following, that first week of May, I saw more integration in this neighborhood. I saw more white faces, old faces, young faces, black faces, Hispanic faces, clergy, gang members, business owners, community members, children coming together to clean up, to march, to donate food, to help senior citizens get their prescriptions that they needed because the CVS wasn't there anymore. People coming together. And I actually stood here in this playground and looked around and saw an integration, the possibility of integration, the possibility that we could all see each other as human beings. I actually saw Lieutenant Colonel Russell, Melvin Russell, and his people from the police department, the community liaison department, which, unfortunately doesn't have control of the whole department, but they were out here. And that gave me hope for what's possible. Even though what we saw on TV was so, or what most of the world saw on TV, what we saw right here with helicopters flying right over our heads. I saw a lot of reporters coming in and taking pictures of burned out buildings. And I walk up to them and say, man, that building's been burned out for 40 years. That didn't happen last night. I saw a lot of white people out here cleaning up vacant lots. I'm driving by and saying, hey, that didn't happen. No, go ahead and clean it up. I saw a human spirit of people wanting to help, of people wanting to tell the story, of people who didn't realize that we had entire blocks, like we just saw this week with Governor Hogan's press conference. And we have entire blocks with nobody living on them. Every single building boarded up. Literally whole blocks. Most residents of Baltimore, I don't even know that exists. If you spend your time downtown with a waterfront view, whether you work down there, wherever you commute to, if you've never driven, if you've never been on the 1000 block of Stricker Street, you don't know that exists. If you've never been in this neighborhood, you wouldn't know that there's 20 vacant properties just on these 2 blocks right here on this playground. So what I saw was hope of people coming together, of people seeing something new for the first time, and there being an opportunity to change the narrative, to change the paradigm, to change people's thoughts, and to actually make some constructive change. I wish I had a good soundbite for it. Well, I think what the rest of the world saw is what this community sees on a daily basis. The police brutality, the burned out buildings, property destroyed, In Sandtown, we live in a constant state of emergency. The struggle to make it through the day alive, to have a place to lay your head at night, to have food to eat, is real every day. I think the media coverage, for the first time, I think, showed that we exist, this neighborhood exists, and we deal with life and death struggles all day, every day. I think what people missed was the reason behind it. I think what people may have missed is that there's a lot of hardworking families that live here in Sandtown too. You know, there's a difference between poverty and neglect. You know, that I can work 3 jobs trying to provide for my children, and still not be able to make ends meet. That minimum wage is not enough to pay the rent and feed a family. That after generations of incarceration, generations of zero tolerance policing policies, you know, so young man ends up with a silly little charge when he's a young boy from following the wrong people, because that's who was around to be his role models, ends up with a charge that keeps him from getting the next job or getting a job. You know, the more I talk about the reality of life in Sandtown, on the one hand, the more depressed and hopeless I can get about it. You know, politicians can do whatever they want. I don't see any legislation that's gonna change it, you know, and go into a sense of despair and talking about how bad the situation is. And when we start talking about, you know, institutional racism and segregation, and no matter what we do, it's never going to be enough. No matter what we do, we're not going to be able to actually change the system at the fundamental level. But I can't believe that. You know, I tell people all the time, in order to in order to maintain my sanity, I have to wake up every morning believing that anything is possible, believing that I can save every life and help every person that I come in contact, that I can provide whatever is needed to whoever I run into in the course of that day who needs help. And in order to go to sleep at night, I have to know that if I even touched one life, not just that day, but in my entire life, that it's worth it. In the days after the events that happened here in Baltimore in April and May, we brought a lot of politicians, government agencies, foundations, philanthropists through our program to show them what we were doing. We've been in this neighborhood for almost 25 years now. And you know, we have 600 people a day who come in and take part in our services, whether that's the drug treatment program or supportive housing or GED or computer literacy or whatever it might be, workforce development, 12-step meetings. So we've been here for 25 years doing this right here on this block in this neighborhood. And up until that point, we were like one of the best kept secrets in the city. And you know, we've been working to change the community for a long time, focusing on almost like a Harlem Children's Zone model. Right. In an intense concentration of all the services and supports that a neighborhood needs to be a thriving, vital community. And but nobody knew that we were doing it. I mean, a few who had helped us over the years, but most agencies didn't know. So when the media came, we were the only place open. They show up at the Penn North Recovery Center because we're kind of the institution in the community. And as we're showing them around, they would say, well, this is beautiful, but we don't fund housing, or we don't fund children, or we don't fund drug treatment. You know, we fund housing, but we don't fund drug treatment, or we fund children, but we don't fund substance abuse. So these silos that keep us from making the changes that need to be made. You know, so we deal with the struggles of trying to find the resources to tell the story, but then people come in and they don't understand it because it's outside of their domain in whatever their government agency is, right? So housing doesn't understand Department of Labor doesn't understand the health department. The health department, the number one determinant of health is housing. So how is the health department and housing not working together to figure out what to do with these houses? How is the health department not working together with Department of Labor to make sure that people are working and have income to eat healthy? You know, so when we bring people through and we show them what we're doing, and they don't understand it, or they come into the kid zone and they say things like, well, what's your curriculum? We say our curriculum is, we're teaching these children how to love and teaching them how to not get shot, how to stay alive, how to love one another. That's the curriculum. We don't need experts, we don't need, so they would come in and say, well, you need to have trauma-informed care, and you need to have this and that, and you need to get rid of all of these games, and you know, there's too much stimuli. These children have there's too many toys and too much stuff happening in this space. And I'm thinking to myself, only somebody whose kids have too much stuff that they don't play with could come in here and say that about some children. You know, what would 100 kids a day, what were these children doing before we opened the kid zone? We were playing in the alley, playing in, you know, a house with no electricity. You know, this is like heaven for these children. Make sure that they eat every day. But most importantly, make sure that they get hugs. Make sure that we're there for them. That, coming back to what Aldeha always told me about heroin. You want me to give up my heroin? You got to replace it with a faithful friend. Heroin has been a very faithful friend to me. And it's the same thing. We're all addicted to something. We're all suffering from something. And at the end of the day, we all just need to feel value and self-worth. We all need to be loved. And too many of our children, too many of our adults here haven't had that. If the system doesn't show you that you're of any value, if your father's been locked up as a result of the war on drugs, and he's not there to give you a hug, there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled. As a country, well, I mean, just focusing on Baltimore City, we really haven't focused on treating addiction, treating substance abuse, treating the drug trade, treating violence as a public health model. We've talked about it. We haven't really. I mean, evidenced by Freddie Gray. He was being arrested for what? Or he was, you know, they were chasing him for what? Were they chasing him to put him into treatment? Were they chasing him to get him mental health support? Were they chasing it? I mean, no. The drug trade as a public health issue. You know, I mean, so they talk about the same thing. You know, treating the epidemic of violence as a public health model. I don't know what the public health budget is for the state of Maryland or the city of Baltimore in total, but they have a model that works, as demonstrated through the Safe Streets project with 4 sites in the city, coming out of Chicago in the ceasefire model. And but the budget for those 4 programs is woefully inadequate. And Baltimore City has, what did I hear recently? We've got like the largest police force of any major city, or like in the top three. Nowhere, completely disproportionate given the population, the number of residents in Baltimore City. The public safety budget, criminal justice budget in Baltimore has got to trump the public health budget, I would imagine. Those 4 Safe Street sites have demonstrated success. They expanded to Sandtown to open a Safe Streets project in Sandtown. And because of who we are in the community, we applied for the grant to operate the Safe Streets Sandtown initiative. I had a lot of current and former drug dealers, convicted felons, you know, the guys that most of society would call throwaways or criminals or useless, approach me and say, "Hey, we heard about what y'all are doing. I'm ready to turn my life around, or I think I can help." Wanting to be a part of that project. These are guys who have got some power on the streets. Could do a lot to stop the violence. Could do a lot to change the trajectory of the drug trade in Baltimore, to reach back and help lift some of the young guys up, to come in and support some of the younger kids, like in the Kids Safe Zone, some of those young men who are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, teetering on that edge of which direction are they going to go. We were awarded the Safe Streets grant by the City Health Department. It's a $360,000 a year grant, so it's about $30,000 a month. It pays for about 6, maybe 7 staff positions. So I would have been able to hire probably 5 or 6 guys off of the streets, put their skill sets and their resumes and their backgrounds to use in a positive way. When we sat down with the city said, well, it's a reimbursement-based model, so you've got to demonstrate that you have the ability to fund the program for the first 120 days, the first 4 months. At $30,000 a month, that's $120,000 that a small community-based grassroots program has to put up front in order to be given that grant, in order to make the changes and actually adopt a public health model to prevent gun violence in this tiny little geographic area. As I told the city, I said, we don't have the funds to be able to do that. We're financially stable, but we don't have $120,000 sitting around that we can wait for the city to reimburse us. And I talked to the other Safe Streets programs, and they said, well, you know, our guys haven't been paid in a while. They're really slow, the city's really slow to pay the bills. So I had to go back to the city and say, you want us to do this. We want to do this. The community wants us to do this. Can you meet us halfway? Can you provide an advance of some of those funds? Or can you give us an extension on the timeline to accept the award so that we can go out and raise those additional funds so that we can do this? The city said no. So that grant goes to another entity that has no, how you doing today? That grant, that program goes to another entity that's financially stable, that's well known nationally, has zero presence in this neighborhood does not know the young men on the corner, has no idea who the next 50 shooters might be. We do, but we didn't have the money, and the city wouldn't put up enough. We weren't asking for more money. We were willing to figure out how to make it work within the confines of the budget. It was just purely a timing issue. I can't hire people. I can't outfit a space and set up offices and start training people with no money. I didn't even want to apply for it in the first place because of what we've seen happen with all the other sites. You know, okay, so I'm opening myself up to get raided, to get, you know, whatever, to, you know, coming back to, is it a setup? I don't know. Is the whole Safe Streets model just a setup so that they can catch people and say, point their fingers and say, see, told you so. You know, so you're gonna pay, you're gonna give me enough money to hire 4 guys who gotta have enough juice to be able to stop a beef between 2 shooters, or however many, and expect them to be 100% out of that life. So they gotta have the juice, but be out of the life, and you're only gonna pay them $20,000 a year. So, do we have a public health model? We have lip service to a public health model, but I don't think people are really ready to adopt a public health model. I see one division of Baltimore City Police Department out here playing with hula hoops and basketballs and hanging out with the at the kids' safe zone, being a positive face, but they're not the ones on patrol. That's the community liaison department or the community policing department. They're not the ones on patrol, and they're not the ones that are part of the gang and drug task force. Until we have leadership that's going to put everything actually in alignment and provide schools that have heat and books and teachers, until we have a health system that's going to help people eat better, until we have investment in businesses that are going to provide healthy foods, until we have a police department that's actually going to put people on patrol who care about believe in a public health model and aren't out here just to arrest and brutalize and